Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
We are living in strange days indeed. 2,000 years ago, the early church was primarily made up of ex-pagans. 2,000 years later, in the modern world here in North America, most of the pagans, it seems, or at least very many of them, are ex-Christians. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining me is a gentleman who researches these alternate belief systems, I guess is one way of putting it, but reports back to us as to what those who are following other paths of spirituality are teaching and who among us are responding to this siren call. He's the author of the excellent book, Game of Gods, a work that you need in your reference library, and one of the speakers at the recent True Legends conference. We welcome back to the program, Carl Teichrib. Carl, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, Derek, good to be with you. Looking forward to this.
You recently attended an event I had never heard of before, but I gather this is something that's awfully big in the pagan community, PantheaCon. What is it, and what made this year's PantheaCon different or unique?
You know, PantheaCon is one of the oldest and longest running indoor conventions or conferences held by the pagan community. It takes place in San Jose, California, and the 26th and the final PantheaCon happened in February, and I was able to attend it. It was in the middle of February, and I was able to go this year. In fact, I kind of really want to make sure that I was in attendance because it was the last one in its current structure. And what makes this unique is it is indeed the largest indoor gathering of witches, druids, heathens, Wiccans, people from all kinds of different and sometimes almost seemingly divergent pagan paths, all coming together, recognizing that they are all in essence of worshiping elements of nature, that they are indeed a religion of nature. And about 2,000 people, I haven't seen the final numbers for this year's PantheaCon, but about 2,000 people, from what I understand, attended, which is down. It's down from previous years because previous years had as many as 2,500 to 2,800. But one of the reasons it was the last, and you need to understand this, Derek, your audience needs to understand this, it's not because paganism is in the decline. Quite the opposite. It's on the rise. The organization has been fraught with internal tensions because the pagan community itself is wrestling with their own growing pains, with their own sense of internal issues, internal squabbles. And so for the organizers and for the individual particularly who founded this event 26 years ago, for them it was just like, we've done what we can. We're going to turn it over now to a different organization, and it will continue, but it's going to now continue under a different name, probably have a slightly different feel and look to it, one that is considered more inclusive. And that was, Derek, one of the things that really kind of, for me, I wanted to go and check out just to see what this tension line was like within the pagan community, because it's all about how inclusive can you become. And so the charges that were laid against the organization and the tensions that were there were built around tensions of gender expressions, LGBTQ issues, the trans witch community, which felt it was being underrepresented, pagans of color. There was a caucus specific for them because they felt they were underrepresented. And these are the kinds of things you don't see unless you attend in person and then start asking questions and watching the setting and getting a feel for the internal conflicts, the internal tensions, their own growth pains, because that's what's happening.
And I guess I should have made clear at the beginning that this event took place back in February before the United States pretty much shut down travel. Just a couple of weeks before the conference, the Watchman conference we attended, first weekend in March, I think was really about the last weekend we could have traveled. So these 2,500 people, even though the virus was becoming more and more known in mid-February, traveled to San Jose for this. Now, the internal divisions in this group, and maybe it's naive for us to think, as Christians, we look around at the divisions within the body of Christ, both in terms of denominational divisions, but also within denominations. You've got, for example, the United Methodists splitting along social issues, social justice lines. So I guess it's kind of naive to think that the same thing wouldn't happen in the pagan community. Did I hear you say that one of the groups that felt underrepresented was the trans witch community?
Oh, yes. Yes, very strongly felt underrepresented.
Trans witch.
Yes.
Okay.
And so there were a number of steps taken this year, apparently, to rectify previous years' little problems where the trans witch community felt that they were being underrepresented. So now keep in mind, this event is taking place at the Doubletree Hilton, which, of course, obviously is a large conference hotel center, and having patrons who are families, businessmen. There's other people there besides the 2,000 pagans. But what was interesting was all of the bathrooms, or not maybe all, but the majority of bathrooms, public bathrooms on the main floor of the Doubletree Hilton, were all turned into gender-neutral bathrooms to appease the trans witch concerns that had come from previous years, saying, you're not doing enough to make us feel included within your pagan community. So the opening ceremonies had an invocation to deities who are non-binary in their gender and sexuality. There was a lot of reference all the way through to the importance of trans LGBTQ issues. And at the very closing of it all, again, there was evocations made at that point to non-binary entities and thanking them for their participation at that event.
That's interesting, because the only one that I'm familiar with, and maybe that's just because I've spent most of my time researching Mesopotamian pantheons or the Mediterranean pantheons because of their relationship to the Hebrew prophets and apostles, is Inanna or Astarte in the Bible, who was, by the time of the first century, by the time of the Bible, actually was kind of split into two: Astarte, the female sex goddess, and Attar, the war god.
Yes, and Athena. Athena also becomes both male and female, depending on the myth and depending on what perspective he is being looked at.
Okay,
and there was a recognition that a lot of the deities that come out of our the mythologies had within their characteristics a dualistic nature within gender identity, being sometimes representing male attributes, the concept of warrior, and then female attributes, concepts of mothering or fertility or sexuality, but that there was often this tension between the entities themselves, the spiritual beings, these gods and goddesses of the pagan world, claiming that there was this internal tension or internal pull between male and female attributes. And that kind of stuff is discussed quite frequently at events like PantheaCon, and it was here as well.
That's something Sharon and I have talked about, because our speculation is that in the spirit realm, and Jesus hints at this in when he is challenged about the trap that was laid for him. The widow whose husband dies, and so she marries the brother, and he dies, and then et cetera, through like 7 brothers. You'd think by about brother 3 or 4 they'd have realized maybe there was something going on there, but it was laid out as a hypothetical to try to trap Jesus in some error of the law. And Jesus said, "You don't understand, but in the resurrection, we are like the angels in heaven, neither marrying nor giving in marriage," which implies perhaps that, although we don't know for sure, that the angels are non-binary. We don't know that, and that they just manifest as male or female depending on their choice when they come into our realm. But God created us as male and female. How much of a drive is there within the pagan community overall to sort of deconstruct that binary division that God created?
Oh, Derek, that deconstruction was very much a part of this year's PantheaCon. Now, again, I haven't been to other PantheaCons. This was my first one. I have, however, been to other pagan gatherings. This wasn't my first kick at that can, but this one had a very strong emphasis on taking a look at non-binary spirituality. One of the workshops I attended was entitled "Getting Straight with Spirit," and the bottom line on that particular workshop was that as we as a society break down the binaries between genders, as that takes place and we recognize that we are all one, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual expressions, then the next stage of our human spirit evolution is to break the binary between humanity and the entities, where we now recognize that we are really one with them. Okay. So the breaking of the gender binary within the human social construct, and that's the the concept that's being laid out here. When we break that down at a societal level, it becomes a model, an evolutionary model to move us into the next phase, which is to break down that binary between human and spirit, the world of matter and the world of spirit. And so then we become one as we break down all those binaries first within our human experience, and it really becomes an overarching model to break it down within the spirit human world as well, which I thought was really interesting because the person giving the talk made it very clear that even our gender politics ultimately will cast a shadow on this bigger idea that what we're really doing is liberating mankind and becoming one with other beings of light and other shining ones with the angels, and then these sentient species we can begin to merge together.
And the goal being this sort of the Eastern idea of nirvana, that we kind of lose self in this great collective.
Yes, and it's not just simply losing self. With this particular workshop, it was about eventually amalgamating back into the goddess herself, or actually how he described it, the person giving this workshop, God herself.
Okay.
By the way, this individual comes out of from a Christian background, and this is important for people to realize. I've been to other pagan events, and I've heard this said a number of times. People are saying that they've come out of a Christian background. This individual came out of a Baptist background, and I heard this kind of personal story over and over again. I came out of a Baptist background. I went to a Baptist school, or I was a Sunday school teacher in our Methodist church, or I was involved in a Pentecostal church, or I was a youth leader. In one case, one of the workshops I went to, one of the high priests in a specific coven he told us, he gave us his background, and his background, he was attending Bible college. He was a converted Christian, attending Bible college, loved biblical apologetics, was going to become a pastor, and then he switched. And that kind of thing you hear over and over again. Those kinds of stories from the church into the pagan world.
We've talked about this in previous interviews about the reasons people gave for making that kind of a switch, or showing up at an event like Burning Man, people who were raised Christian but just found it unsatisfying or dissatisfying. What were the reasons that you heard at PantheaCon for ex-Christians who were now attending this event to find some meaning in pagan religion?
Yeah, and this is important. I need to do more study on this to really kind of bore down into what the situation is. Now, regardless of what you or I or anybody else may think about why people leave the faith and what the reasons are, this is generally what's been communicated and what I heard at PantheaCon. First off, the big one, paranormal experiences. Individual Christians claiming they've had some paranormal encounter, some psychic ability, and then they have that, big questions about this, and they take that to their pastor, they take that to their church leadership, and their church leadership tells them basically to ignore it, or they give them non-answers. Well, that doesn't work. And so they go outside the faith looking for some type of explanation, and paganism offers an explanation within a spiritual cosmology. And so that becomes their source of grounding, their place of knowledge and their place of community. That's probably the one thing I heard over and over and over again was we had a paranormal experience. The church wasn't able to answer this. Nobody wanted to talk about it. I had to find the answer to this. I was so bothered by it. And so I ended up looking elsewhere, and paganism gave me the only, at least gave me some answers to work with. It wasn't that Christianity can't give answers, but it was that church leadership was unwilling to give answers. Again, now what we may think of how people leave the faith or why they leave the faith, in many respects, in this case, is almost irrelevant, because these are the angles that they're giving, the excuses or the reasons. Another one was theological problems, receiving what we would call pat answers or really non-answers to perplexing, troubling, personal questions of faith. And then as you have to live with this question, this angst, eventually there's distancing that takes place and the searching for something spiritual that's outside of the Christian church experience. I've heard that again over and over again. To me, and the one that kind of strikes as an excuse in a sense more than anything, or maybe not necessarily an excuse, but fitting already a worldview, social concerns. There's a lot who blame church for Christian hypocrisy or a lack of interest on social issues, pressing social issues of the day, like LGBTQ concerns or ecological issues or, inequality. And so because the pagan community is typically left of center, then that becomes attractive for people looking, to find a spiritual home for activism. So those are some of the things, but by far the ones that really bother me the most, Derek, is excuse or reason number one, paranormal experiences, and reason number two, theological problems, and both of those not being answered within a church context. Listen, if we can't answer that as church leaders, there's a problem. If all we do is give non-answers, we're pushing people away. Shame on us.
Yeah. Well, that's as L.A. Marzulli says, we've got the guidebook to the supernatural, the Bible. And if we are afraid to address issues or questions about things like UFOs, the existence of extraterrestrial life, demons, ghosts, miracles, or theological problems, like you said, how do we reconcile the God of the Old Testament, who on a surface level reading appears to be genocidal? Okay, I've picked this group of people, so we're going to give you permission to go ahead and kill all these other people over here, without exploring and explaining the underlying theology behind it, or much less the existence of these other supernatural entities who are engaged in this long rebellion and have co-opted the people who had occupied the land, and the detestable practices that they had lured them into. That's should be like Christianity 101.
Right. And so if you're not getting answers and you're perplexed by these hard issues, you're going to go looking elsewhere, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that seems to be probably the major reason that at least I've encountered. Again, I'd like to do some serious scholarly surveys on this and really dig into, what really is the reason? Number one, what is your background? And then what is the reason? I've done some of that when I've attended transformational festivals. I've done a few surveys like that, and that has been very helpful. But I think it needs to be done now directly within the pagan community. And probably the only way of doing it really is hands-on by going and saying, hey, do you want to fill out some social surveys?
One of the sessions you attended at PantheaCon was the session on ancient Greek heroes and the initiatory quest. I found that interesting because of the research that Sharon and I are doing right now for a forthcoming book, which kind of extends the experiences that the Hebrew prophets and apostles had with their neighbors into the Christian era, when, of course, they were living in a world dominated by Greeks and Greek speakers. Even when the Romans had taken over, still Greek was sort of the lingua franca. And so they knew what their pagan neighbors believed. Interestingly, the Septuagint makes some references to Greek mythology that have been kind of translated out of our modern English Bibles, because our texts are based on the Masoretic text and not the older text available to the translators of the Septuagint a couple centuries before Jesus. What was this about, and how did they make ancient Greek mythology relevant? How did they relate it to the rest of the pagan gathering there?
Well, a lot of the pagan community is reconstructing ancient Greco-Roman religious practices. In fact, that is an interesting topic within the pagan community. How close can they find, or how close can they reconstruct a legitimate ancient pagan practice? Is their practice going to properly mirror what was done in the past? And so this particular lecture, there was a lot of discussion of the meaning of Greek mythology, and he took it more from the perspective of Jungian psychology and symbolism. He was looking for interpretive parallels with the Kabbalistic tree of life, with yoga, spiritual practices that he was doing. But there's a lot of recognition that we're looking for an authentic ancient spiritual practice, because in the Wiccan, especially in the Wiccan community, they really don't have a deep past. In terms of being a religion, Wiccanism and witchcraft, the way we know it today, is quite different than how it was done years and years and years or generations ago. Realistically, all it has is about 80 years in its current form. In fact, one of the arguments you hear repeatedly when you go to these events is the question. It's not necessarily an argument, but arguments being made about, well, what does this look like to have an authentic Wiccan experience or an authentic pagan practice? How do we measure this up against what we know from the fragments that we know from other ancient pagan practices? And how does this align? And so there's a lot of discussion, especially in the communities that are trying to recreate Greco-Roman pagan reconstructed practices. A lot of it is kind of a guesswork based around the fragments of knowledge that they have gleaned. And so I give the pagan community credit in that they are constantly digging into the past, constantly reading. Pagans really are a people of books. They're always working on trying to have a book context where they're reading and studying and trying to get a handle of really the past, because they're trying to find some connection to it in their current practices.
That raises an interesting question. What is the balance between the practices that they're trying to develop based on what they're researching and what they feel they're being told through personal interaction with these spirits?
Yeah, in fact, that's very interesting. And so, example, one of the workshops I went to was on Caradwyn, who was a Welsh muse, a Welsh witch, and she eventually became a goddess within the Druid community. And the person giving the workshop, and I've heard him speak a couple of times, his name is Christopher Hughes, very energetic, very flamboyant personality, really interesting to listen to. But he was telling us that, look, It's not about upholding an authentic pagan lineage, this constant search for historical credibility. It's not so much about that. It's about honoring the past, what we know of the past, being inspired by what we have now uncovered from the past, and then creating your own experience in the now. And so this is something you hear over and over again. If it works for you, however you've defined this, if it works for you, then do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be picture perfect. It doesn't have to be historically accurate, because we don't necessarily know the history. We can get glimpses of it, but we don't necessarily know it. So if it works for you, that's what's important. And while you're doing this in the now, you're attempting to honor the past by what you're experiencing in the present. So there's this, again, this is some of that internal tension that you're seeing as the pagan community is growing and trying to define itself. It's something I realized when I went to the first pagan event in Minneapolis a few years ago. It was called PaganiCon, and that was obvious as the people in attendance there were really wrestling through, all right, what is an authentic practice, an authentic experience? And how do we make that work, especially as the pagan community is very fragmented.
So you had you people there representing the pagan traditions of ancient Greece and Rome, the more modern Wiccan practices which draw on Celtic myth and legend. You also had some Norse pagans there as well. I mean, how do these? Given that there was not necessarily always a friendly relationship between some of these cultures, how do they deal with the? Was that a source of some of the tension between the groups at the PantheaCon?
Yeah, especially within the heathen community, there has been frictions within the heathen community because of questions of racial segregation.
Just to clarify, the difference between heathens and pagans is what?
Well, heathenry is a type of paganism. Heathenry is paganism built around Germanic, Nordic deities, Germanic, Nordic pagan experiences. It's a subculture within the broader umbrella of the pagan world. We often just have used the word loosely as somebody who's not a Christian, but it actually has a specific meaning. And so the heathen community, because it's Nordic, Germanic, some of the teachings there have had a racial overtone. And so this year, one of the workshops on Nordic deities had it very clearly stated within the description that people who have racial views or exclusivistic racial views are not welcome to it. To me, that was just a little sign of again this tension right there within their own body, as they're going, okay, we have to be inclusive for everybody. But it's interesting because we can be inclusive of everybody, yet I had a conversation with a Mexican witch, and when she found out I was a researcher from Canada, she wanted me to come to her workshop. She was involved in a workshop called Pagans of Color Caucus, because there are pagans of color who believe they've been underrepresented. And in many respects, Derek, this is target identity groups claiming, hey, you're not listening to me enough, and it's back and forth. and I said to this lady who's a Hispanic witch, I said I can't come because I don't self-identify, and that was the thing. In program write-up for Pagans of Color, it said you had to self-identify as a person of color only. And I had to explain to her, I said, I don't color identify. I believe that every human being, irrespective of your skin tone, we're all of one blood. We're all human beings. And while she completely agreed with me, and then she wanted to invite me kind of underneath her umbrella, I said that would be hypocritical because I don't identify as a person of color. And your statement says I have to identify. You've just created a double bind. And she recognized that, and I didn't attend.
So a lot of groups claiming victimhood as part of this. I don't want to be cynical and snarky here, because that doesn't help build any bridges. And again, I think it would also be hypocritical if we looked at that and then didn't look inside the body of Christ and recognize that some of this is going on inside our churches as well, where we've got various groups claiming that we need to listen to them because their complaints are going unheard. So we'll set that aside. I noticed that there were historians and archaeologists who were giving presentations here, and this is one that I know is a question that Christian scholars have to deal with from time to time, because there are some pieces of evidence that have been dug out of the ground in ancient Israel that suggests that the Hebrews, whether this was Orthodox belief, well, certainly wasn't Orthodox belief based on what's in the Bible. There were some who believed that Yahweh had a consort.
Right.
So the presentation on the divine feminine in the ancient Near East, what was presented there and how was it received by the pagan community?
Oh, well, number one, the pagan community received it very, very well. In fact, the person giving the presentation was very open that sometimes this talk creates some hostility as people then push back against his argument, which ultimately is that God had Yahweh had a consort. Yahweh had a union. There was also a goddess within the ancient Hebrew worldview. He's an archaeologist, Jerome Grist, and he gave a very detailed account of the ancient Near East, the goddess worship that took place in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, and how it had a cultural overlap between region and region, different eras, different time periods. But of course, the big question was, did Yahweh have a wife? And you're right, there are some small things that point to it. What is interesting to me, and this is just me speaking, what I find fascinating with it is, to me, it demonstrates the biblical truth that the ancient Israelite people were involved in syncretism.
Right.
But that's something we saw from Mount Sinai. We see this all the way through their history, that there is this conflict between following Yahweh, following the God, the creator God, the God of the Bible who made them, following him alone, or integrating other aspects of the religious world around them, the pagan world around them, into their own worship of Yahweh, which we see examples of, and the very first example being, and probably the most prominent one being, when they're at Mount Sinai and worshiping the golden calf, and then making references to that golden calf and saying, see, this is the Lord, this is Yahweh who brought us out of Egypt, which was complete syncretism. So to me, the presentation, as he was giving this explanation of how the Israelites adopted and brought in goddess worship, making the argument at one point, and making a very persuasive argument for the people who were there, that Yahweh had a goddess wife, that Yahweh had a union, a divine mother figure was a part of the heavenly hosts. To me, it was an argument being made in favor of Israel's ancient past of synchronistic religious practices, not the argument that God had a wife. But the response was really interesting, because you would hear comments and murmurs in the audience in agreement, or gasps of kind of like oh wow, as all of a sudden what you're seeing and what you're hearing is, in a way, this argument for Yahweh and Asherah being union, having this marriage, this argument in essence was bolstering their position that yes, the pagan way is really the right way, because even back in that era, if we peel away everything, we'll see that even Yahweh was a pagan deity.
So this served to confirm the bias that many of these ex-Christians had, is that we who accept that the Bible is true and accurate have been deceived, and that the pagan roots of Judaism and Christianity have been obscured.
Right, and here was to them was proof. This is proof that monotheism, Judeo-Christian monotheism, was really pagan at its core, and so their own bias was being confirmed. Absolutely, their path was justified.
Did anyone bother to ask? Okay, well, if the spirits that you're following are so powerful, how is it then that they've basically allowed themselves to be overtaken and obscured by this false religion, or what you believe is this false religion of Christianity?
Violence. There
have been a lot of violent pagan religions in the past. Come on.
I know. Oh, and this is the hypocrisy, they have to kind of work through. And on occasion, I have heard pagan lecturers say, look, Yahweh didn't have a monopoly on violence. Everybody has been violent.
Yes.
But so often, in fact, in this case, again, I was at workshops where Christians were demonstrated that, hey, the only reason that they really came to the forefront was that they were able to pull the levers of politics and then commit violence against the pagan community. I'm just sitting there as a Christian researcher, as an observer, going, in my mind, I'm going, hold on. The early Christian church was being persecuted by what was essentially pagan divine kings in a pagan construct. They were being fed to the lions. Christians were being torched. We were being slaughtered.
The Roman Empire was the most
pagans of that day. Yeah,
it was the most powerful political entity of its day. And they didn't find a whole lot of friends among the Parthian Empire either. So, they were kind of caught between the proverbial rock and hard place. Look, if your gods couldn't overcome these poor Christians trying to struggle, who managed to somehow survive against the might of the Roman Empire, what good are your gods? Oh, my goodness.
There's a couple of interesting things that come to mind. First of all, as we're talking about the tensions within the pagan world, the issues of those social tensions, to me, it demonstrates and proves the fact that human nature is at work all the way through, that we are fallen human beings and that we're going to quarrel with one another. And then when you take a look at the question of Christianity's rise over the pagan world and the arguments being made saying, hey, you Christians, you crushed us, on and on, those arguments go back and forth. To me, the bottom line is that the God we serve in the Bible, Yahweh, is utterly different than creation. And this really, it's not even so much an issue of monotheism versus polytheism. The real issue, when you really, just tear it right down to its core, is the question of this: is God separate from nature? Is he the divine other, the one who is completely incomparable, or the one that cannot be judged against nature because he stands apart from it? Or is God simply a part of nature and wrapped up within the world of creation? In other words, is the creator distinct from his creation? Mm-hmm. And in the pagan world, they completely reject that first notion that God is distinct. That is anathema. And so the pagan mindset at the very front, at its very core, at the foundational level, is this belief that nature is deified and spiritually experienced through these spiritual beings that arise around natural processes, but that God, the spirit world, the world of nature, the world of man, are all basically continuous, one within the other. And so this is really what I see is really something fundamental as Christians we need to get a hold of, because otherwise we're going to be lost in the details and the argumentation and the counterpoints going back and forth. And so we have to be able to articulate that the God we serve is not the same as nature. He is not a process of nature. He's not a part of nature. He stands outside of nature. And that makes Yahweh fundamentally different than the pagan gods and goddesses that do intermarry, that do have these consorts and these connecting points. And if you appease this god, that god will do this for you because you've now, sacrificed for fertility or whatever the situation may be.
One final question, because I think that's a great way of getting us, to how we need to view this whole thing. But the one final question I want to ask, when it comes to this, a lot of Christians, people listening to this program, may have no personal experience with that realm. How mainstream is this modern paganism?
Very mainstream. In fact, I would contest that every single person listening to this broadcast has rubbed shoulders at some point in one way or the other, either indirectly, and we all have indirectly, because paganism is a religion of nature. When we take a look at what we consider to be just secular politics built around ecology, built around saving the earth, built around climate change, that right there is at its core a pagan worldview. That really is the political expression of paganism. Though it looks secular, at its heartbeat, it has a religious worldview or a pagan paradigm. So it's already affected all of us because paganism really is nothing more than a religion of nature now, except nature's being spiritually experienced. And then odds are really high that most people listening to this broadcast, even in the heart of the Bible Belt, in fact, I would contest you're going to run into more pagans in the Bible Belt probably than almost anywhere else.
Wow.
I make the argument in my book, Game of Gods, and I provide the evidence that the Bible Belt, specifically the Midwest, has a very substantial pagan presence. In fact, the Twin Cities region has the most covens and the most pagan communities of any place in the U.S. And so you're going to be running into them in the mall. You won't even know it. They're your school teachers. They're your kids' friends. They're people that you just, end up meeting. My wife and I were in Minot, North Dakota last fall, just for a couple of evenings and a couple of days. And one evening we went to the theater in Minot and watched a movie. And the lady that we bought the tickets from was wearing a piece of jewelry, and it was a very specific piece of jewelry, and I recognized it immediately for what it was. And I just kind of nudged to Leanne, saying, "Look at her necklace." And without saying anything beyond that, as we walked away, Leanne was like, "What's that mean? What's that necklace about?" I said, "She's a witch. She's a Wiccan." I mean, she was wearing that openly. She looked like any other, 16, 17-year-old kid who's got an evening job.
In North Dakota.
They're everywhere. Okay, so here's the question. Do we look at this with fear and trepidation, or do we look at this as opportunity? The early church had to live through this in a far more real and raw way than what we face. I think we have to look at it as an opportunity, and the primary opportunity is that we're able then to express, first of all, that the God we serve is not the same as nature. In fact, the God we serve is even bigger and better than nature.
Amen to that. Yeah, this is, like these days in which we're living right now with this outbreak, the pandemic, interestingly, Pan being one of these pagan deities, this is opportunity, not something to fear.
Right.
Yeah. Carl Teichrib is the author of Game of Gods. There'll be a link to where you can find the book in the show notes at vftb.net or wherever you're consuming this particular podcast. Carl will be one of the featured speakers at the Future Vision 2020 conference for Prophecy Watchers. It's been rescheduled to October 22nd through 25th. That should be quite a gathering. We had a lot of fun with that. They actually talked Tom Horn into coming out to speak again. He keeps saying he's never going to do it again. And then, Gary Stearman will ask, or Steve Quayle will ask or something. And then, Tom puts on the suit one more time. And so we'll have some fun there. And we look forward to seeing you and Leanne there, if not sooner, some way, somehow.
Yes, I'm looking forward to being able to move around freely without having to worry about all the craziness that we're experiencing right now. But we'll see what happens, right?
Amen. Kyle Teichrib, his book, Game of Gods, available wherever fine books are sold. We'll put a link in the notes to where you can find it. You'll find that at vftb.net, the show notes, or wherever you're listening to this particular podcast. Coming up, some thoughts on the death of George Floyd. That's ahead on A View from the Bunker.
The Book of Enoch is one of the most influential and historically relevant books in history. And now, for the first time, you'll be able to comprehend the book's content with greater insight and clarity than ever before. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the companion to the Book of Enoch Special Collection. When you order the brand new companion to the Book of Enoch Reader's Commentary Volume 1 by Dr. Michael S. Heiser, you'll also receive his best-selling book, Reversing Hermon. This groundbreaking work unveils what most of the modern church has never heard regarding how the sin of the Watchers in Enoch 6 through 16 helped frame the mission of Jesus, how the descriptions of the Antichrist, the end times day of the Lord, and the final judgment connect to Genesis 6 and the Nephilim. This and so much more. Plus, you'll also receive on DVD The Book of Enoch, Fallen Angels, and Ancient Aliens, an exclusive production with Dr. Michael Heiser regarding the blatant lies of ancient astronaut theory and the horrifying nature of fallen angels and alien abduction. But that's not all. You'll also receive the beautifully printed hardback edition of the original historical Book of Enoch from Defender Publishing, perfect for assisting serious researchers and students in the study of the Bible and the early age. Sold separately, this special collection retails for $120. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. So whether you've read the Book of Enoch before or perhaps want to journey through it for the first time ever, without a doubt you'll find this resource enormously enlightening. So don't delay. Order the companion to the Book of Enoch Special Collection now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online, vftb.net. And in the left-hand sidebar, you'll find links to download our free mobile apps. You can bring all these programs right to your smartphone or tablet without having to set it up through a podcatcher. However you get it, we really don't care. Just trying to make it easy. These are good for Android or iOS devices, and you'll find the link at vftb.net. You can follow us on Twitter at ViewFromBunker or at Derek Gilbert. That's D-E-R-E-K, by the way. On Facebook, the page is View from the Bunker, and you also find us at Parlay, or if you prefer, Parler, the new social media site, parler.com, user handle Derek P. Gilbert. On Monday night this past week, as you're hearing this on May 31st of 2020, a man named George Floyd arrested by Minneapolis police on suspicion of forgery, and he died in police custody. Video shared on social media showed one of the officers involved in the arrest knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck after he was subdued for about 8.5 minutes. In the last 4 minutes, apparently, while he was unconscious. Mr. Floyd died, as I said, and that touched off protests in Minneapolis. Rightly so. Mr. Floyd had been subdued. Yes, he apparently resisted arrest. Yes, he had a checkered background. That does not justify the treatment he received at the hand of the Minneapolis police. The officers involved, 4 of them, have been fired. The officer who knelt on his neck has now been charged with third degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. Protesters saying that's not enough. They're pushing for first-degree murder. Well, the protests have spiraled out of control. 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis burned to the ground the other night. Stores have been looted. A Target, AutoZone torched. Other buildings and businesses have been looted or destroyed. Some family-owned businesses, and many of them in the neighborhoods of the people who are protesting. This makes no sense at all if, in fact, the goal was to protest the death of George Floyd. What's actually going on here is a travesty, and it diminishes and demeans the death of George Floyd. He should not have died. But peaceful protests would at least have pushed for his death to mean something, meaningful change, so that this doesn't happen to someone else. Now, what's happening in Minneapolis and what we've seen happening in places across the country, from Atlanta to San Jose, California, are turning this into yet another event that will divide America along political and racial lines. And that's exactly what the principalities and powers and cosmic rulers over this present darkness want. Congratulations, Antifa. Congratulations, anarchists. You are serving your masters well. And most of you don't even know it. I'm just going to leave that there. Let's forget the politics. Let's remember, we're dealing with a spiritual conflict, a supernatural conflict. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's why I say that at the end of every program, as a reminder to myself as much as anything else. It's easy to get caught up in the politics, point fingers. It's the left, it's the right. It's the anarchists, it's the white supremacists. There's just a human dupes, human shields even, for the real enemy. That's why we do what we do, just to try to educate us, because we in the church have forgotten this. And if we don't understand the nature of the battlefield on which we're deployed, we're sure not going to convince the people who are outside the church. Coming up later in, well, as you hear this, it may well be the month of June already, and we are looking forward to the Battle Ready Conference. This will be another virtual conference because of travel restrictions, June 26th and 27th. The Battle Ready Conference will be coming from San Antonio, but streamed to the world in high-definition video. Sharon and I will be presenting presentations, recording them here in Studio G, and then sending them down to Adrian and Cindy Appleberry, who will be coordinating all of this. There will be some interactive features with the Battle Ready Conference that we have not seen before. We're very interested to see how this works, because that's one of the best parts of attending a conference, is being able to meet and talk with people face to face. So hopefully this will facilitate some of that. Stephen Bankar's, Russ Dizdar, Pastor Carl Gallups, Brandon Gallups, Rabbi Zev Porret, Pastor Casper McLeod, all taking part in this. And we hope you will too. For more information and to reserve your place online, go to battlereadyconference.org. That's battlereadyconference.org. Coming up in September, Sharon and I honored to be part of the Warrior Summit and Retreat. Talked to Jamie Walden about this not long ago. You'll find out more information at his website, omegadynamics.org, omegadynamics.org. September 18th through 20th, Sharon and I will be at the Nephilim Again conference. We'll get a chance to see Russ Dizdar, L.A. Marzulli again, and our colleague from Skywatch TV, Drew Graffia. He will be there. This will be in the Columbus area, Newark, Ohio, the Cherry Valley Lodge. For information and to sign up, log on to nephilimagain.com, nephilimagain.com. The following weekend, we go right back to Columbus, Ohio, to the Embassy Suites Columbus Airport for the East Coast Prophecy Conference from our friends at Southwest Radio Ministries. We'll be there with Pastor Carl Gallups, Pastor Billy Crone, Bill Federer, Larry Spargimino, Bod Glaze, and more. And we hope to see you there as well. For more information and to reserve your place, log on to swrc.com, swrc.com. And then into October, the Future Vision 2020 conference from Prophecy Watchers, our good friends Gary Stearman and Bob Ulrich. Tom Horn will be one of the speakers there. Sharon and I both speaking. Sharon received her official invitation just about a week and a half ago. So we will both be there along with L.A. Marzulli, Bill Salas, Dr. Tommy Ice, Pastor Billy Crone, Tim Alberino, Carl Teichrib, tonight's guest, one of the speakers at Future Vision 2020, Ken Johnson, Dr. Michael Lake, Joel Richardson, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis. What a gathering. This is going to be a great one. So join us at the Colorado Springs Marriott for the Future Vision 2020 conference, October 22nd through 25th. To sign up, log on to prophecywatchers.com. Next week, we talk with our friend across the pond, Mark Sutherland, filmmaker, online, marksutherland.org, about what is going on in this world. It's like we've shifted into an alternate timeline or something, based on where we compared to where we thought we would be at this point in the year. Mark Sutherland has some insight on it, and you will hear him next Sunday. That is June 7th, 2020, here on A View from the Bunker, which is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme, Iron Bacon, is by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. Our announcer is D.C. Good. Again, next Sunday night, Mark Sutherland here on A View from the Bunker. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.